Hi, everybody. Hi, Katie. Hi, James. How are you doing?
Hello. Good,
Good.
thank you. How are you?
Good, thank you.
Good morning.
Hi, everybody. Welcome so much to Omni's 2022 Resourcing and Talent Planning Survey, where we're going to where we're going to share with you the key findings and recommendations. Just a little bit about the agenda and how we're going to manage today for you. So, this is an exclusive sharing of the CIPD and Talent Resourcing Survey. They run it in partnership with Omni, and I'll tell you a little bit about how that relationship came about in a second. I'm Louise Shaw, I'm the MD of Omni, and it's my pleasure to introduce to you Katie Noble. She's our Resourcing Transformation Director, and also James Crichton, who is our Head of Assessment, and the brains behind the outfit, as we like to say. So we plan to take around 60 minutes for the presentation, and then we'll have an open Q&A at the end. So because we are on Zoom webinar, if you have any questions during the presentation that come up, just put them in the Q&A, and we promise that we will come back to them at the end of the actual presentation. Now, we will be recording the actual presenting part that Katie, myself and James are going to be doing, but at the moment of the actual Q&A, we will stop, and we just use that for people who weren't able to attend today so we can share it back with them. So before we get into the actual sharings of the survey, if I can just take a brief moment to describe who we are at Omni. So we are resourcing transformation specialists. You can see there our vision is to support organisations to resource for the better. And we have three main service streams. We have recruitment, and this is where we operate in a number of different services where we may be a fully enterprise level resourcing process outsourcing business. We have an MSP arm, an executive search arm, and James works within this section of our business too, where he offers assessment as part of all of those. We also have flex and embedded models depending on that. So really flexible resourcing solutions to support internal TA teams or fully outsourced if required. And then the area where Katie and James predominantly work is within our talent consultancy and our talent development areas. And this is where we support both our RPO clients, but also in-house talent teams to support how they resource for the better as well. So in terms of how the CIPD relationship came about, at Omni, we're always striving to influence and also develop the way that we work. And we felt what better way to actually listen to and partner to the CIPD and all its members. So the survey happens on an annual basis. We're all members of the CIPD here as well, and we find it just absolutely crucial for us to take those findings and we use it within the work and the support that we do with organisations too. So a little bit about the survey itself. So the survey is conducted all online. It happens in Q2 of this year, and it's actually run by YouGov. So YouGov work in partnership with Omni and the CIPD to do that. And they target UK-based HR people and professionals to respond to the survey. So this year they had a really good population. It was over 1,000, so 1,055 people responded. And the figures that we share, they have been weighted to be representative of the UK business population, and that we look at both size and sector as well. So the report itself and the survey has been running for many, many years, back since 1997. And essentially, we keep a lot of the questions the same, but we do vary it depending on what's actually going on in the market. So the survey attempts to capture trends and developments in resourcing practice, and then look at how we can then make recommendations out to everybody. At the end of today's session, if you haven't done so already, we will send you a copy of the report, and also we'll send you a copy of this recording, which has the slides in it as well. To think about the actual themes that came out of this year's survey. So we analysed the data, and there were some key themes which we've then grouped into meaningful activities that you can see here. So we grouped them into attraction and retention, D&I, and then lastly workforce planning. And what we will do is between the three of us, we're actually going to take each one of those bullet points and share with you the findings, but more importantly, we think the actual recommendations of the so what can you actually do about it to change things within your organisation. Before we do that, it's always really helpful just to think about where we are right now. We are conscious that the CIPD survey is done in the summer. Things are changing, so it's really useful to understand understand the context of where we are. Not surprisingly, it's not going to be a surprise to anybody. We are still working in a very tight talent market, and that prevails in the UK, but we know it is globally as well. It's not just here in the UK. So we've got two bits of data we're going to look at with you. First of all, we look at the CIPD data. So they run a quarterly report, and we also stay very close to the ONS data as well. So here you can see that this is the CIPD's most recent labour market outlook report, which was run in the summer of this year. And it highlights that recruitment is incredibly difficult right now. And the forward-looking indications also suggest that it's going to be the same for the next quarter. So we all know that we're in the middle of a hiring boom, and it's felt by the CIPD that this hasn't yet peaked. Of course, we have seasonal activity that's going on right now as well, given this quarter that we're going to go into. So the most popular, interestingly, the most popular response to recruitment and retention difficulties was to increase salaries. And we're seeing this now with some of the highest paid awards in recent history. What the CIPD do is they look at what they call the net employment balance, which is the measure between the difference between employers expecting to increase employee levels in the next 3 months on those they're expecting to decrease levels. And this has remained steady essentially at plus 34. What's really important to note is that it remains really high relative to those pre-pandemic time series. And it suggests that the UK will continue to see employment gains across the board. And we are seeing that just within Omni as well, with all the clients that we work with and the customers we work with. We're most definitely seeing that across the board too. Another really interesting figure then is from the ONS. So this is according to their labour market report. If you don't look at them already, we do actually run a quarterly report we put out from Omni, where we look at all of this data together, but you can just go onto the ONS website too and actually get it. And this is from October, so just released recently in the last couple of days. And you'll see here that the number of job vacancies in July to September, it was 1.2 million, but there is a slight decrease. So you'll see there right at the top of there that it's starting to fall. So it fell by 46,000 vacancies, and it actually is the third consecutive quarterly fall. Vacancies were still 450,000 above January-March 2000 pre-COVID levels. So we really need to be mindful that, yes, there's a slight fall, but we are still operating at in really high numbers. Interestingly, the rate of the fall was in 13 out of the 18 industry sectors that the ONS look at. And the largest ones were in food services, information and communication, and also what they call human health and social work. So they are the sectors with the largest falls, which is quite interesting for us to look at. If we then look at the opposite of that, looking at the availability of talent, we look at then what's the unemployment rate. And that's been pretty much static at 3.5% for a long time now. It's slightly lower than in previous quarters, but not a big deal of difference. What is interesting and what continues to be a trend is what we call the UK economic inactivity rate. So this is where people are coming out of the workforce. So the ONS, they look at people who are certain age brackets, and what we're interested in is almost those that are really leaving the market rather than students. So 16 to 24-year-olds are captured in that. But when you delve into the actual detail, when we look at the main reasons for people leaving, it does tend to be for long-term sickness for those aged between 50 and 64 that we would usually expect to be active. So to us at Omni, we start to analyse that and actually think about how can we attract that group back to the workforce, which is a really important figure for us to look at. So just a few final stats before we actually get into sharing of the findings. Interesting, we look at growth in average total pay. So the total growth, it was 6% in growth in regular pay, and was 5.4% amongst employers in June to August 2022. And this is still the strongest growth in regular pay seen outside the COVID period. And there, in terms of breaking it down by sector, Average regular pay growth was 6.2% in the private sector and 2.2% in the public sector, which is really interesting. And actually, those of you that do work in the public sector, you can start to see some of the strains that you might be getting from an attraction perspective. In terms of those areas with the largest growth rate, so it was retail, hotels and restaurants saw the largest, followed by finance and then business service sectors as well. So just some really, really interesting stats. We always like to start any presentation, any information that we want to share with this. But now I'm going to pass over to Katie, who's going to start doing the introduction of the actual findings from the survey. Over to you, Katie.
Thank you very much, Louise. So let's first look at, as Louise said at the beginning, we've grouped some of these our kind of survey results together. And the first one, unsurprisingly, that we really want to focus on is attraction and retention. This is all about how we can attract a more diverse talent base and ensure we are retaining them. And some of the themes that came from that, and the 4 key themes we want to explore in a little bit more detail, is thinking about how organisations are absolutely still seeing that increased competition for talent, and that is going to continue. And how, in response to some of the retention issues, they're looking to increase pay and benefits and developing skills alongside offering flexible and hybrid working solutions, and how we can use technology to increase accessibility and improve experience. So let's have a look initially at increasing competition for talent and how, as we know, that this absolutely is continuing. And as Louise has been through there, we understand the market that we're working in. So it is absolutely no surprise that this competition for highly skilled talent is continuing. So let's delve a little bit deeper into some of the actual stats themselves. So as we've just been through, and as Louise has just been through in terms of the market, we know that we are working in a time where it's very, very busy. We've got the highest number of vacancies than we've had for a while. But coupled with that, we're also seeing lowest unemployment rates. We are seeing early exit from the labour market by older workers, and Louise says for a number of different reasons as well. And also non-UK nationals returning to their home countries as well. So there are lots of things impacting this real increase competition for talent. 70% of the respondents report that competition for well-qualified talent has increased over the last year, and 60% say that talent is more difficult to retain as well. So not only are we struggling to recruit the skills that we need, but we're having to work even harder to retain them as well. Interestingly, 19% of organisations agreed they had received more suitable applicants over the last year compared to the previous year. However, still 39% are receiving more unsuitable applicants as well. And I think this is an area that's really interesting. So again, let's have a look at that in a little bit more detail. From our 2021 survey, we found that over 3/4 at that time of the respondents were experiencing challenges attracting suitable candidates. And this year we wanted to explore that and delve a little bit deeper into the reasons why. So overall, we found that 77% experienced difficulties attracting candidates. Senior or skilled roles were the most difficult to recruit, although around 1 in 4 also report challenges attracting low-skilled candidates. And again, we certainly found that ourselves. We recruit within Omni, within our partners, across a number of different sectors, a number of different roles. And actually, there is a real competition for what we would class there as that low-skilled talent because of that movement across the different sectors as well, and across the different skills that people are looking for, and retraining at this level as well has really made this particular level, we think, very, very, very competitive. Coupled with that, around 1 in 4 experienced challenges onboarding new hires as well, which is a very, very small improvement on last year. And this is possibly due to the lifting of coronavirus restrictions and the need to onboard remotely only. We ourselves, again, are seeing real challenges around this area. And if there is a lack of engagement in that process, or even if there is a real, if there isn't a defined process in place, it is leading to more dropouts than probably we've seen for quite a number of years. In such a volatile market, that engagement piece from the beginning to end is so important, and often that onboarding stage is overlooked, hence why we are seeing that kind of high dropout rate, really. There has been a drop also in the proposition reporting that they have had an excessive number of applicants to process, which again is very reflective of the current labour market and the unemployment stats. So although going back to the slide before, we understood that there are still a high number of unsuitable applicants, but actually what we're also seeing, there is a lower number of actual physical applicants coming through as well, which again is no surprise. Let's now have a look at the spend around this, because again, I think this is really interesting to think about. So we understand that there's a real competition for talent out there. And the first thing that we can see from the stats that were published is that there is an increase in recruitment activity. Some of the stats that Louise shared before, more organisations try to fill vacancies over the last 12 months compared to the previous year. Nearly 3/4 of organisations, around 70% attempted to fill permanent vacancies in the last 12 months, and nearly half attempted to fill short-term vacancies. If we think about the ONS stats around this, I think it's really important to consider the fact that open job vacancies returned to pre-pandemic levels in April to June 2021. And in January to March 2022, vacancies were at the highest level since comparable records began, which was around 2001. So we understand at that stage that we were dealing with the highest number of vacancies than we had ever dealt with before. And that was across all industries, and vacancies were higher in January to March 2022 compared with January to March 2020 levels as well. What's interesting though is there has only been a very small increase in the recruitment costs. So we are seeing that increase in activity, we are seeing that increase in competition, but we're only willing to spend that little bit more to attract the people we need and to retain the people that we need. So the median cost of recruiting senior managers showed absolutely no change in the previous year and still remains considerably lower than in previous years. There was a small increase in employees recruiting for other type of roles, but again, lower than in previous years as well. So the additional challenges of recruiting in this tight labour market can increase costs, although these may be offset by the use of technology or changes in the recruitment methods used as well. When we go through some of the practitioner comments as well, we need to start thinking about how we recruit in this very passive marketplace and how we need to think really cleverly about how we spend some of our money. The median cost per hire remains higher, no surprises, I don't think, in the private sector than in the public sector, and non-profit sectors, possibly due to differences in the recruitment selection method used, as well as economies of scale in public sector organisations, which do tend to be larger. All these stats, as we say, are really interesting given the difficulties that we have in identifying and attracting the suitable candidates that we need. And it just shows, is there a willingness to spend money? This is a question it's worthwhile asking ourselves, I suppose, at this point. Is there a willingness to spend money, unsure of where we should spend that money or how we should spend that money? Well, let's now have a look at what employers are predicting for next year. And what is great to see is that around 2/5 of organisations are anticipating an increase to their recruitment and talent management budgets over the next year. So not just recruitment budgets, but the talent management budgets as well, which is an upturn on the last 2 years. Just 9% anticipate a decrease to their recruitment budget and 6% a decrease to their talent management spend. This, we think, reflects high recruitment intentions in many sectors. We don't think that the numbers are going to come down that much. The tight labour market, and for some organisations at least, an increased focus on retention to achieve the size of workforce needed to meet the current demand. We will talk a little bit about the employers' reaction to retention in regards to upskilling, which I think is really important, which is why I think we are seeing that movement in the willingness to spend money around talent management. Private sector and non-profit sector organisations are most likely to anticipate an increase in both recruitment budget and talent management budget. However, public sector respondents are more likely to report budgets will stay around the same. So let's have a look at some of the practitioner comments that came through in relation and in regards to how we can think about some of these challenges and how we can tackle the recruitment and talent management challenges that we have in this tight labour market. So the first thing that we would think about is taking a real strategic approach to workforce planning. The more planned, the more forward thinking you are, the better chance you will have of identifying the candidate you need ahead of it becoming a really reactive situation. And when we think about a workforce plan, it's important to think about what the next 6, 12, 18 months, 12 months are, and as far in ahead as you can go. But as long as you have something, you have that look ahead, even if it is only for 6 or 12 months, it gives you so much more opportunity to think about, and to our next point, widening that particular talent pool. But it's also an opportunity to think about the critical skills that your organisation needs and the key roles, and thinking about how you are going to build for the future. So again, second point to touch on there is thinking about taking a proactive approach to widening your talent pools. Vary your recruitment outreach and be very aware that we are working in a multi-generational workforce, who are all going to react and interact with the marketplace in very different ways. So we need to ensure that and we'll talk about some of our employer brand recommendations shortly, but that your employer brand is reflective of what your market is now and what you want it to be as well, and how you can attract them. And that will help you think about widening your talent pool. More than ever, as we've mentioned, we are recruiting in a really passive marketplace. And again, it's worth thinking about where can you spend that budget that is going to attract that passive audience, because there are going to be less and less people proactively applying to your job boards. And also when thinking to the roles that you are looking for, and work with your hiring community around what is essential, what is desirable, and how can we make sure that we are selecting for potential as well as the skills we need right now. Engage candidates throughout the whole recruitment process. Our role is to help them perform at their best. Remove barriers to work for prospective candidates by adopting inclusive recruitment and selection practices, such as advertising, making jobs flexible, removing unnecessary qualifications from job adverts, and providing possible financial support and adjustments for candidates throughout the whole process as well. Really importantly as well, when we work in talent acquisition, resourcing, HR, we can do all of this great work, but it is going to fall flat unless we ensure hiring managers have access to structured selection tools and are fully trained on how to inclusively select as well. So that's a really important part of that attraction and retention journey to think about. I do think at this point, again, like I said, it's really worth thinking about where we spend that budget and how we're going to spend that budget. So let's now have a look in a little bit more detail about respondents looking to increase pay and benefits and developing and updating skills in reaction to the tight labour market that we're in right now. And again, I don't think it's a huge surprise that this is what organisations are looking to do. If we move to the next slide, I think this is really interesting that we are seeing that pay and benefits has risen from second to first place in respondents' rankings of what's really important to them in regards to brand and motivation, replacing organisational values, which has fallen from first to fourth place, which is quite a significant drop. And again, no surprises, bearing in mind the market we're in now and the news all the time around the cost of living and the interest rises that we're all waiting to hear about. And so it's more important now for candidates, for employees to ensure that they have the right pay and benefits they have to cope with the ever-changing landscape that they're in as well. Overall, however, so even though we can see that that's a huge attractor, just 42% of organisations include pay and benefits among their top 3 attractors, and there is considerable variation between organisation sectors as well. So understanding your candidates' employees' motivators is essential, as we say, in this ever-changing landscape, and understanding that there will be sector differences and there will be regional differences when it comes to brand and attraction. Pay and benefit stands out as a key attractor, in particular in the private sector, but in the public sector, more respondents believe perception of the organisation as an employer is important, and nearly as many include job security among the most important elements of their employer brand. Non-profit organisations are more likely to rank their goals, their strategy, their values as most important in attracting candidates. No surprises, as maybe they are less able to compete on pay and they have to appeal maybe to candidates in a slightly different way, thinking about things like flexible working, working from home, hybrid options and so forth. What we cannot forget though is that all of these elements are really important when we are trying to attract candidates. Pay and benefits, organisational values, flexible working only takes you so far. It's in combination that you can have a real impact when it comes to your brand. So let's look at the stats around what organisations have done in answer to the changing needs and motivations of employees and prospective candidates in regards to brand. And what's great to see that 3/4 are taking action to improve brand, because I think we can see that there is a real difficulty in the marketplace. We have to spread our message, we have to get the word out there, and the best way to do that is absolutely to focus on your employer brand and your authentic employer brand. Large organisations are most likely to have done this though at this point. The most common actions when it comes to brand were to increase flexible and hybrid working opportunities, which I will discuss in more detail shortly. This is really key impact area and as a real particular focus for the CIPD as well at the moment. And to make pay benefits more competitive, although the latter was less common in the public sector. Around a quarter of organisations have refreshed or promoted their values, and a similar proportion have improved their work environment as well. Just 12% though have taken steps to measure the impact of their employer brand, which is quite interesting, and fewer have monitored or actioned feedback received through other websites and social media. So thinking about things like your review sites and various different places where you might get really active feedback, what we are finding is that employees are putting some effort into that brand, but they're not tracking how they're actually, what that return on investment is, or what the measures are, or what they're doing with the feedback that they then receive. So action is taken, but no feedback is kind of being dealt with or managed. So let's now look at what other action employers are taking when it comes to retaining employees as well. So in our 2021 survey, looking back on the preceding year of COVID-19 lockdowns, no surprises that retention initiatives were focused on improving support for employee wellbeing, work-life balance, flexible working. This year's findings show that over the last 12 months, more organisations addressed retention issues through increasing pay, 54% compared to 32% the previous year. This was far more common in the private sector than in the public sector. So in the private sector, 61% more likely, public sector only 14% more likely. In the public and non-profit sectors, improving support for employee wellbeing remained the most common focus of retention initiatives. Around a third of those that took steps to improve made efforts to improve employee involvement as well, which is brilliant to see, to increase learning and development opportunities, to introduce and enhance flexible or hybrid working options, or to make other changes to improve work-life balance as well. 3 in 10 took steps to improve line management's people skills or support employees through coaching, mentoring and buddy systems as well. Taking into consideration the labour market information and the stat from ONS we've just been through, pay is not rising at the same rate of inflation. And with the news focused on, as we've said, increased cost of living, interest rises, it's no surprises that it is really the pay that is increasing that kind of retention initiative as well. And it's going to stay at the top of the motivational and attractor initiatives, we think. However, as we said, all of these other initiatives are equally important as well. The focus is very much still on work-life balance and on flexible working and on different opportunities and access to opportunities for employees as well. And if we look at that, actually, if we look at training and working, this is another response that employees have taken. So the most common response when it comes to filling hard to fill positions, for absolutely to upskill their existing workforce. While nearly half use apprenticeship schemes or sponsor relevant professional bodies, 37% are developing graduate programs and 28% are creating mid-career career returner programs. So going right back to what Louise was saying earlier on, we have seen a number of older people leave the workforce, and actually we want to try and get them back into the workforce by running all of these different type of initiatives. The public sector and larger organisations across all sectors are most likely to use these approaches. Offering greater work flexibility is the second most common approach to addressing recruitment challenges, particularly common in the not-profit sector. As noted above, this can be helpful in both attracting and retaining talent, not least through opening opportunities to a wider segment of the workforce of the labour market. So if we're able to offer that flexibility, we're going to widen naturally that talent pool as well. In line with these findings, more organisations this year, as we said, are offering better pay and benefits. And the CIPD's Good Work Index also finds pay and benefits to be a key reason why people are leaving. Just 27% are currently targeting passive candidates, which I think is really, really interesting stat. So bearing in mind the market that we're in now, we know there are less active people. We have the lowest unemployment rates than we've had for quite a number of years. There are only 27% of organisations that are proactively targeting passive candidates. This could be for a number of different reasons. They don't have the maturity within the talent acquisition team, they might have the technology to support or the understanding to support, but it's certainly, we feel, key areas if we actually want to tackle some of the challenges that we are facing right now. Let's now have a look at the initiatives organisations are currently undertaking or planning to take as well. So we've touched on this a little bit already, but the graph shows clearly there that nearly half of organisations currently offer apprenticeships, and around a third offer graduate programmes, which is great to see. A substantial proportion of organisations are also making efforts to access experienced individuals, as we say, through these career returner programmes. These figures have not changed though much really over the last 12 months. The ONS stats and the ONS data, as we say, for January to March 2022 shows that for the first time the number of vacancies was higher than the number of unemployed people. In this tight labour market, in-house talent development programmes to grow new talent and to encourage the economically inactive into work can be particularly important for organisations to access and cultivate the skills they need. So we know that we're struggling to attract the people we need. So being able to retain by development through really great training programmes, through career pathways is a great way of increasing that retention. And also thinking about things like your career returner programmes as well. All of these initiatives here are more common though in larger organisations. In addition, apprenticeships and graduate programmes are more common in the public sector as well. So let's have a look now at some of the practitioner comments. So what came from the survey is a way, again, that we can tackle some of these challenges that we are facing. Review what is possible when it comes to pay. We're not saying that every organisation can or has the opportunity just to increase their salary and their benefits, but what is really important is to understand what your position is in the marketplace. Are you around average? Are you paying above average, below average? Understanding where you are will give you the impetus, I suppose, or the focus then to think about what else you can do as an employer to attract people. Because if you're not able to do it that way, you've really got to think about what are the other initiatives that you offer as an organisation to attract and to retain people as well. We would advocate thinking about pay transparency as well when you're advertising roles, and be realistic about what is positioned as a benefit. We would always advocate, as I say, advertising salaries on job adverts. As I've just been through, and apologies, I'm probably saying that I'm reiterating this point again and again, but there are less people actively looking for roles. And if you want to attract a passive audience, what is going to attract them, along with great opportunities and a great role, the first thing they're going to look at is what am I going to get paid and what are the benefits associated? And if they don't see that, they're going to be more likely to move on. Pay transparency is not always possible, but where it is possible, please include it. It does make a massive difference. Now is also a good time as well to critically assess your employee value proposition. We've just been through there some of the other really important employees all around job security, organisational values, flexible work-life balance. These are all really important. You need to understand what your organisation's EVP is, and also are there any regional differences? Are there any other kind of job family differences as well? And all of these and it's important that you know what yours are. While pay is important, many people also want to work for organisations that are purposeful, that are inclusive, and that do support wellbeing. Career development opportunities are really important still, along with job security. And job security, probably more than ever, is really important right now. So if we are able to really promote that, to state that, to push that forward, that's a really powerful message that will get through to people. If we move to the next slide, when we think about how we can develop and update skills as well, in-house talent development programs to grow that internal talent. If you have people in your organisation, they are the best source of potential within your company to move up into roles that you are finding really difficult to recruit. Think about other initiatives as well. For example, supporting social mobility programs, really encouraging the economically inactive back into work. Encourage employees to think about lateral moves as progression. A move doesn't have to just be a move up the ladder. It can be about developing skills and developing opportunities. Develop strategies to attract or mid-career change programs, help broaden and to diversify people's skills and experiences. We've all been through a very tough couple of years. Everyone has different priorities now. Let's find out maybe if we can tap into some of them. Invest in ways for young people as well to access opportunities in your organisation, such as through apprenticeship, industry placements and post-A-level routes, and keep up to date. All of these areas and everything that we spoke about should absolutely be highlighted in your EVP and promoted across your career sites as well. These are all the things that people are looking for. Let's now have a look at flexible and hybrid working solutions, which I think is a really, really interesting topic. Certainly no surprise in today's market that in answer to the labour short market and the absolute focus post-COVID 2021, the well-being is flexible and hybrid working solutions. Interesting member to help ensure that the opportunity for flexible working is a right from day one, and it'd be really interesting to see where we go with that. We also need to think about flexible and hybrid working solutions, not just in relation to being able to work from home. There are a number of job roles out there that is not a possibility, but that does not mean that you cannot have the conversation around what flexible hybrid work is for them. And that's a really important message as well. So thanks, Louise, for moving on. Let's have a look at some of these stats. So over 2/3 advertise some vacancies as open to flexible working. So only 2/3 advertise some vacancies. However, more organisations compared to 4% year report that advertising roles as open to flexible working arrangements are among their most effective methods for attracting candidates. So we can say that absolutely it is an attractive if we can put that onto our job adverts or job descriptions. There has been, however, in the proportion advertising jobs as open flexible working. So we are still seeing that kind of plateau around the same. 1 in 5 organisations advertise all job vacancies as open to flexible working, and an additional 49% do so for at least some jobs. So at least some jobs are advertised as open to that. SMEs are most working around 10% compared with really interesting stats there. If we can move to the next slide. Let's have a look at how people are advertising. So around half advertise some vacancies as open to location, and absolutely COVID-19 has accelerated a significant shift in the use of hybrid and remote working. Over 1/5, around 20%, report their use of hybrid remote working has greatly increased the past 12 months, and a further 20% it has somewhat increased. So we are seeing a slight increase. Have some hybrid or remote working offerings, with just over 1/5 offering option to work. And those non-profit sector are most likely to hybrid remote working, with non-profits most likely to offer a full-time option to work from home. Nearly half of organisations, around 47%, advertise at least some vacancies, as we've said, as open to location. These organisations were more likely to agree that they recruited more diverse talent and from a much wider geographic within the UK, compared with those that require employees to work at a specific location. So again, we can see the stat there is supporting the thought process that widening that geographical increase your diverse talent pool. Over 2/3 of organisations that offer the hybrid remote working report it has allowed their organisation to attract and retain more talent, which again, really powerful stats. So if you think about that, 68% report has allowed their organisation to attract and retain more talent. So that's a really powerful stat to know that if that is something if your organisation can do, other organisations are absolutely seeing the impact there. If we can move to the next slide. Thanks, Louise. Many organisations are experiencing other benefits of hybrid remote working as well. Around about 45% report it has increased. And organisations, however, report a negative impact in these areas, and respondents are particularly impact of hybrid remote working on engagement in the organisational culture. So we're still trying to figure out how can we get that culture piece right, how can we get it working when we have this more disparate workforce. The benefits of hybrid remote working clearly depend on how well it is managed and implemented. Additionally, 68% of organisations report often work from home or hybrid work has allowed their organisation to attract and retain more talent, with some stats actually saying that including this in your job advert can increase the number of job applicants by up to 33%. Nearly a quarter, 24%, expect hybrid and remote working to increase. This number to continue, and they expect to remain the same. Just 12% are anticipated. This confirms other research indicating that the significant remote during the pandemic is absolutely here to stay. So let's have a look at some of the recommendations around this. I'm very aware of this, developing kind of flexibility and hybrid working options are not you're not able to do this about your and how you can offer flexibility to them and what that would mean for them. So develop policy for employees to request flexible working from day one employment. As I've said, there is a private members bill going forward, and it might be that this is something that is in law that is going to happen, that every employee will have to do this. So let's see what happens there. And wherever possible, stipulate on job adverts that jobs can be done flexibly. This will absolutely help you attract a wider pool of candidates looking for flexible roles. And if roles can be done remotely, ensure working spaces are obviously safe and are sensible as well. And as we've seen there from the stats, it does help productivity and engagement. Raise awareness of different forms of flexible working, such as compressed hours, job sharing, and explore how they can be effective in roles that have traditionally been seen as non-flexible. Important for employees who can't work remotely and need to attend their physical place of work. Flexible working could also be targeted to recent retirees to attract them back into the organisation in a way which works for both parties, as they may be experiencing high living costs than initially expected. So you don't have to bring them back into the organisation in the traditional way, but get back in a way that allows them to kind of get that work-life balance they're looking for. Consult and collaborate with employees as well when designing your hybrid working practices. Ask them for this information and then develop something that's really clear and transparent, and that everybody understands where the eligibility sits as well. We take really active listening with workers and managers and really understand what it is that they're looking for. Remember, one size does not fit all, so build that flexibility into your offering as well. Along with the benefits of flexible and hybrid working comes the challenges, as we've talked about a little bit, of boarding, of induction, development and well-being. You need to have the correct process in place, that they are built around engagement, and ensure that you have the correct practices in place that will effectively induct people still and be able to manage their role really effectively. Review early retention figures as well to make sure that you're not losing people at that point, and to monitor potential interventions needed with that remote onboarding as well. Thanks very much. Over to you, James.
Thank you, Katie, and thank you to Katie's Wi-Fi for just about holding on as we got through there. I'm sorry if that was slightly broken up. I thought it was better to, I think it made sense in the slides there, but I thought it was better to continue than me to try and jump in on slides I'm unprepared on, but thanks a lot, Katie. So I'm
very sorry.
No, it's not you at all. We'll test the fact we're 200 miles apart to see if my connection is any better. So now moving on to technology. So I lead the assessment practice. I'm a resourcing transformation consultant, but specialise around assessment and D&I in particular. But following on thinking about flexible and hybrid, one of the things that's helped us be able to do that is technology, and that's where we will focus our attention next. As we might expect, somewhat forced adoption of technology to support remote working over COVID-19 appears to have accelerated the use of technology recruitment onboarding in general, with 4 out of 5 organisations that already use some form of technology in their recruitment cycle reporting that they've increased the use as a consequence of the pandemic. Next slide, please. Overall, the survey shows a year-on-year decrease, however, in the use of technology in recruitment processes. Now, that's likely down to the end of social distancing requirements, which means a return to more face-to-face interactions. Of all the areas that it could be employed, technology is most likely to be used in candidate interviews, with nearly half of organisations using video interviews, and around 1 in 5 are using online induction processes or online tests and assessments. And unsurprisingly, all of these technologies are much more likely to be used by larger organisations than smaller ones. Although it's not covered in the data in this particular graph, within the survey, within the report, there's also some information about the use of AI in recruitment. And in findings similar to last year, just 6% of smaller and about a quarter of larger organisations report using any AI or machine learning in their recruitment processes. The data does show an increase in the proportion of organisations using AI to source candidates, rising from 5% to 8%, 5% last year, sorry, to 8% this year. Now, those absolute numbers are pretty small, but in terms of increase year on year, that seems pretty significant. So more organisations are looking to bolster their human resource with technology to source candidates, which is unsurprising in the competitive market that Katie's been talking about. To move to the next slide, organisations are reporting greater benefits from the use of technology as well. So the most common being the increased accessibility for candidates, with nearly 3/4 of organisations reporting that tech has expanded their pool of suitable candidates. That said, we're talking about suitable candidates, nearly 2/3 say it's also increased applications from unsuitable candidates. But here too, we can see that technology is increasingly being employed to deal with this, with just over half reporting their use of tech has enabled them to screen out unsuitable applicants, which is up from 40% last year. So there's a not insignificant increase there. This year, more organisations report their use of technology to improve candidate experience, with a rise to 78% from 68% last year, and nearly 3/4 say it's sped up the recruitment process. This year, we've also seen an increase in the proportion reporting their use of tech has helped reduce unconscious bias, increase diversity and quality of hires, and helped improve their understanding of job seeker behaviour. But it's worth pointing out there's considerable scope for more effective deployment of technologies in the recruitment process, as the majority of respondents feel their use of tech has been limited either by a lack of resource or a lack of internal skills and knowledge. So thinking about what that means in practical terms, so the recommendations that the CIPD and also have come out with are firstly, to my last point really, so assess internal capability and the resourcing around recruitment technology, and upskill and invest further, developing the capabilities that's required where needed. It's important if you've got the technology, you've then got the capability to be able to employ it properly. Research and develop a business case around the technologies will free up the people to focus on the value-added activities, using technology to drive efficiencies for talent experts, but also for wider HR and hiring managers within the organisation. So this is really a case of get the technology to support the people and have both of those working in tandem to deliver the objectives. Next, explore technology that delivers highly engaging and bespoke candidate experience to help attract higher quality candidates and also retain them through the process and post-offer. In a talent short market, it's more important than ever really to engage in a personalised way and to be able to move people through processes quickly, both of which can be addressed at least in part through the use of technology. Ensure that any rec tech meets the needs of the organisation and provides a fair and inclusive experience. Now, that sounds blindingly obvious. Make sure your technology does what you want it to do, but it's vital to establish that it's actually delivering the benefit that's intended. Frequently, we can see some technology being employed in a way that's having unexpected consequences, but continuing to be used. So continue to evaluate and to iterate your use of technology on looking at the day-to-day operations and also the bigger picture. And in particular, my personal warning would be make sure that you're looking at this through a fair and inclusive perspective, that what you're doing is fair, basically. And lastly, within the recommendations here, try to get the right balance between the technology and the human interaction in the process. If you ask candidates and hiring managers for feedback on the processes, you'll be able to see what their thoughts are, but you can also look to experience processes yourself in a really good way. And doing that would be to apply for your own vacancies. That way you get to identify any blockers in the application process, but you'll also personally get to see what that initial touch point is, what your EVP looks like to someone that's engaging with your organisation for the first time. That can be invaluable. So as we move on to the next section, we've talked a little bit about inclusion there, but now if we look at inclusion and diversity inclusion more specifically, the findings are telling us that the diversity initiatives are very similar to last year. Overall, 61% of organisations report they have a formal diversity strategy, which is similar to the 62% that reported the same last year. 70% of organisations are taking some steps to attract diverse candidates, and 2/3 have measures to address diversity issues in their recruitment process. That said, we can see from the numbers on this graph here that there's no one method to attract more diverse candidates being adopted by the majority of organisations. So there's still, between different organisations, a pretty scattergun approach being taken to see what's working and what to employ. It appears there's been opportunities for many to make changes that require little additional resource that could have a big impact. So, for example, only 18% of organisations report making efforts to remove bias from their recruitment process through testing the words of job adverts to see if it affects who applies. Now, that can be done without a huge resource, but could potentially be impactful, and certainly from what we've seen is impactful. And perhaps unsurprisingly, the public sector, not-for-profit and much larger corporate organisations are more proactive around D&I than the smaller or mid-sized private sector. Moving to the next slide, looking at D&I from a selection perspective, we can see that again there are opportunities for many organisations to employ more inclusive and fairer processes. Selection is the area that I personally spend most of my time working on, and it's really interesting for me to see that only a quarter of organisations are determining selection criteria in advance to ensure it's directly related to performance. In my experience, missing this foundation is probably the biggest issue that many organisations have with regards to both inclusion, but also the overall validity of their selection process. So it's well worth having a look at that if you're not already. And only 28% are training interviewers on their legal obligations and objective interview practice. This statistic in particular demonstrates a difference between private and public sectors, with only 22% of private sector organisations providing training, as opposed to over half within the public sector. Similarly, although 18% of private sector companies remove certain biographical details from initial selection processes, over half of the public sector are doing this as standard. And we can also see considerable variation in efforts to recruit diverse candidates to the board. Just under a third of organisations are very or extremely active in their efforts to recruit more diverse candidates to the board, while a similar proportion are not at all active. For me, I think this is one of the most worrying statistics across in terms of D&I, in that we really need to be seeing D&I embedded at a strategic level within organisations. And as leaders in talent, it's incumbent on us to ensure that the ED&I agenda does not stop at the boardroom door. So in terms of what the recommendations are, firstly, get support to critically and objectively review your end-to-end candidate experience through a diversity lens. So look at that, look at the experience that someone is having in applying and going through a process with your company. Ensure that the entire process is inclusive and accessible, and supports your specific diversity objectives. And I think that's a key point here, is in terms of when looking at D&I, be really clear about what your specific objectives are and how what you're doing is impacting them. So building a strategic and proactive approach to attracting and developing a diverse candidate pool across the organisation at all levels is important. If you engage senior sponsors to help communicate and commit to the strategy, and you can also ensure the visibility of diverse role models is very helpful. Utilising employee networks to get voices heard in the organisation. And with all of these initiatives, promote that through the recruitment messaging so people can see what you're doing and demonstrate your credentials as an inclusive recruiter, and that will have an impact. Evaluate your current recruitment activities to assess which are most effective in diversifying talent pools. So be bold here, communicate with the business case, and prepare your organisation. There maybe need to trade off certain areas in order to reach greater diversity targets. So for example, it may be that there's a slight negative impact on time to hire as you go to more sources, or that as you try new things, it takes slightly longer to embed them, but these are worthwhile sacrifices if it achieves the bigger strategic aim. Ensure the selection methods used are free from barriers, and train hiring managers on effective inclusive selection. As I mentioned earlier, ensure that the criteria that you're using are truly predictive of performance. And then once you've understood them, create the assessment process that objectively assesses these in candidates. Once the process is defined, as Katie mentioned as part of hers, ensure that the people involved in the assessment process have the understanding, the training, but also importantly, the time to be able to complete those sections, or they're part of the assessment process effectively. And then lastly here, capture inclusion and diversity data at application stage, and formally evaluate any adverse impact against any candidate groups at every stage of the process, and look to review this and make changes as they come through. Now moving on to the final section, how strategic are organisations in their approach to resourcing and talent planning? So here's an interesting statistic. Less than 2 in 5 of survey respondents report that their CEOs prioritise talent management. So while this represents an increase to last year's 30%, it remains lower than the pre-pandemic level of 48%. which we saw in the 2020 survey. Chief execs are clearly facing many pressures, exacerbated by the economic climate and the announcement 24 minutes ago of the 3% in bank rate. But the importance of effective talent management may be underestimated in some areas. I think it's worth flagging this. There's also considerable variation in workforce planning timeframes, which I'll demonstrate on the next slide. Thank you. And organisations vary considerably in how far ahead they look when planning workforce requirements. In little change from last year, 30% of organisations are taking a short-term approach of up to 6 months, whilst 11% report planning over 3 years ahead. And again, unsurprisingly, larger organisations are more likely to have a longer-term outlook. Right now, with such ambiguity about the future, economically, politically, technologically, mid-range scenario planning is really important to test the robustness of approaches, but also to allow rapid pivots when the outlook changes. So if you've scenario planned, you can move to a different operating model more quickly than if you have to start from scratch each time. And undoubtedly, that's going to be the case of the environment's going to continue to change. Few measure return of their recruitment investments. So just 13% of respondents report their organisations measure their return on investment of these processes, and a further 14% that say they plan to introduce measures going forward. The most common methods to measure ROI are cost per hire, performance of new hires, and the turnover rate of new hires. And effective planning requires good quality data. So, however, as we found last year, many organisations could benefit from a more evidence-based approach to inform resourcing decisions. Nearly half of respondents report their organisation is not collecting data in any of the areas measured in the survey outlined here. Large organisations are more likely than the smaller ones to collect data in these areas, but even within large organisations, the figures are relatively low, with just over a third, with more than 1,000 employees reporting they don't collect any data in the areas that are considered within the report. But looking at the data that is there, 31% of organisations collect data to identify skills gaps within the organisation, 28% identify future skills requirements or retention issues, and around 1 in 6 assess the availability of supply of talent to the markets. And then with regards to taking a more strategic approach, the recommendations are keep workforce planning simple. If there's nothing in place at the moment, start small and build momentum over time. Build a business case of why it needs to be a central strategy. A good way to look at that is forming a cross-functional committee to help inform the approach. So it's not just within TA or HR, but working with the broader business, finance, procurement, the operational business to have joint ownership of the workforce planning, which obviously impacts the ability of everyone to deliver and has huge cost implications. Next, take a comprehensive data-based approach to improving all resourcing decisions. Consider the entire workforce, including both permanent and contingent. Collect data and insights on the associated costs of employee turnover and the hidden costs as well. Data will allow development of the strategy, but also importantly, it supports the business case. So when seeking funding, if you have a stronger data-led business case, you're more likely to be able to draw down. Collect and evaluate that data and then strengthen the approaches based on the insights and continually monitor. And then lastly, think about how jobs can be designed, particularly with hard to fill roles, to widen the potential employee appeal or applicant appeal and access and engagement. When recruiting, question what the need is, and rather than looking for like, build the role up based on the objectives that need to be achieved by the role. And think about if there's an opportunity to think more strategically about what's needed, and that could involve job share, part-time, or a change in the job skills that are required for someone to be effective in their role. So that brings me to a close. Thank you very much. I think I'm handing back to Louise now.
Thank you very much. Thank you, James. Pleased to say your Wi-Fi was perfect there.
Thank you.
No, that is competition. Thank you. So here is a reminder, there's so many themes and recommendations that we've made there. In the actual report itself, you'll be able to see them in a lot more detail, and it goes into more granular detail as well, breaking down where we can different sectors and size of organisations too. So do check out the report and then think about how it aligns to what you need to do in your business. But we felt the way that we actually split out the findings, looking at attraction, education, D&I and workforce planning in particular was most helpful when we're working with organisations in TA. So what we're going to do now is have an open conversation to share more learning with you, think about what resonates. So you can start to post any questions that you have in the Q&A. I can see a few of those have been coming in already. Before we do that though, actually Katie's going to just share with you, it's the so what, isn't it? When you're actually sharing information like this, it can feel quite overwhelming. And a lot of questions that we have from the people we work with is, where do I start? What do I do now? So at Omni, we've actually created a methodology that Katie is going to share with you briefly that might help you navigate where to go to.
Thanks, Louise. I think you said it, perfectly there, that it can feel really overwhelming, especially all of these different statistics. The fact that we, are working in a time of trying to recruit and retain and grow our businesses in a time, and I don't really know what to expect. We can't predict what's around the corner. What we do know is that the statistics are still higher than pre-pandemic levels. So we know that vacancy levels are still going to stay high. They might start to come down a little bit, but they're still high. That number's not going to change. We know that unemployment is still at an all-time low. So we have to think differently. But to do that, we need to know absolutely, like you say, where to start. So the recruitment effectiveness assessment allows you to think about where you can begin your journey. And ultimately, across these 16 elements that I'll put up here, and all of which are pretty much covered in the survey, and we use the survey results as well, included in this when we do our benchmark. And ultimately, what we do is we look at where you are as an organisation across all of these elements, and we score on a 1 to 4 basis, and then benchmark against our work that we've done before, but then also using the CIPD benchmarks, other industry standards as well, so that you understand where you are, where you compare, but more importantly then, what is the roadmap? How do I improve? Where do I begin? And we help you think about how you can put a strategy together and how you can put your attraction HR strategy together based on all of this to help you think about ultimately, really the question with all of this in place is, I want an effective resourcing practice and process. So how do I do that? How I'm attracting the best talent, I'm keeping the best talent, and I'm doing it in a really fair and objective way with processes that are aligned to a great hiring manager and candidate experience. And ultimately, this piece of assessment allows you really to think about all of that. And as I say, the results we put together and put through to you are in conjunction with the CIPD as well. So it's a great place to think about.
Thanks, Katie. I'm going to stop the recording now before we start looking at some questions. So for those of you that are joining us on a recording, thank you very much. And we hope you've enjoyed it. What we will be sending out is a link to a small questionnaire on our website. So you can do that, and it has a snippet from an ED&I perspective and some questions to help rank yourself, and you'll receive a report for that as well.